با سلام به بینندگان عزیز، برنامه نان گل سرخ رو نگاه میکنید. من مریم نمازی ام و این برنامه را با همکار بسیار عزیزم فريبرز پويا
با سلام از من
بهتون تقدیم میکنیم. این برنامه این هفته در مورد مذهب و نقشش در کودک آزاریه و سوالی که ما میخوایم اینجا مطرح کنیم اینه که آیا خود مذهب و ساختارهای مذهبی یه فضایی ایجاد میکنن؟ آیا این فضایی ایجاد میکنن که کودک آزاری اجتناب ناپذیر میشه یا نه؟ به نظر من اینطوریه. و مصاحبه خیلی جالبی داریم با کاکس، یکی از نمایندگان یه سازمان اروپایی به نام فريبرز که اگر بخوایم اسمش رو ترجمه کنیم، کسایی که بازماندگان تجاوز جنسی و کودک آزاری کلیسا بودن، اینها جمع شدن و دارن علیه این کودک آزاری مقابله میکنن و مقاومت میکنن. مصاحبه خیلی جالبیه و تاثیر و صحبتایی که میکنه خیلی مفیده برای کسایی که مواجه شدن با این نوع کودک آزاری، به خصوص از سوی مذهبیون، از سوی امام ها و ملاها و کسای دیگه که توی کلیسا کار میکنن و نقش دارن. و مسلمه مثل همیشه فتوای احمقانه هفته هم خواهیم داشت. و این برنامه هم از این به بعد یک بخش جدیدی هم داریم در رابطه با اخبار شوکه آور این هفته. اما قبل از اینکه بریم پای برنامه‌مون و با هم صحبت کنیم روی موضوع، بیایم با هم یک کلیپ کوتاهی در مورد این برنامه با هم نگاه کنیم. با ما باشید.
موقعیت ارجح مذهب و اختیاری که به دستگاه و سازمان‌های مذهبی داده می‌شود، شرایطی را به وجود می‌آورد که آزار کودکان به وسیله روحانیون به عنوان نمایندگان خدا مورد سوال قرار نمی‌گیرد. آزار جنسی کودکان به وسیله روحانیون با تمام فجیع بودنش تنها شکل کودک آزاری به وسیله آنها نیست. همه چیز از جمله تلقین مذهبی، حجاب و دادن هویت مذهبی به کودکان شرایطی را به وجود می‌آورد که در آن آزار کودکان اجتناب ناپذیر می‌شود.
به نظرم این سوالی که داره مطرح میشه تو این برنامه سوال خیلی بجاییه. میدونین خیلی اوقات ما نگاه میکنیم میبینیم که کسایی که تو نقش مذهبی مثلا میان توی جامعه، مثل یه ملا یا یه کشیش یا هر کی، یه نوع اتوریته‌ای دارن توی جامعه که انگار هر نماینده خدان، هر کاری میخوان میتونن بکنن و هیچ اشکالی هم با کاراشون نداره. و به خصوص وقتی برمیگردیم به یه جامعه مثل ایران که خود دولت مذهبیه، دیگه مشخص میشه که چه نوع کودک آزاری نه فقط قانونیه بلکه قابل قبوله و زیر سوال هیچ وقت نمیره.
آره، سوالی رو که فکر کنم اول برنامه مطرح کردی مهمه که پاسخ درستی رو بگیره، به خاطر اینکه کل سازمان و دستگاه مذهبی و نقشی رو که روحانیان بازی میکنن تو تمام مذاهب، تنها اسلام نیست یا کلیسای کاتولیک نیست، تو تمام مذاهب همیشه یه شرایط رو به وجود میارن، یه چارچوب رو به وجود میارن که کسی نمیتونه اینا رو مورد سوال قرار بگیره و این و رابطه‌ای رو که دارن غیر قابل سواله و خود این رابطه نابرابر شرایط در یه طرفش اینا هستن که ظاهرا خیلی پرقدرت هستن، نماینده خدا هستن، کسی نمیتونه اصرار کنه، در برابر دیگه مردم هستن و نه تنها مردم، کودکانی که هیچ دفاعی ندارن از خودشون بکنن، توی شرایط کاملا نابرابر قرار میگیرن و هرچی بیشتر این فاصله وجود داره، شرایط نابرابر وجود داره، چارچوب و امکان آزار و اذیت وجود داره. حتی آدمای بزرگ هم میتونن این کارو بکنن، ولی به خصوص در برابر کودکان که هیچ امکان دفاعی از خودشون ندارن، نه میتونه صداشون دراد، نه علاوه فیزیکی میتونن مقاومت بکنن، نه علاوه اخلاقی فشاری رو که جامعه به وجود میاره در واقع مثل که دستای کودکان رو شما گرفتین در بسته در اختیار یه نیروی غیر قابل کنترل و غیر قابل سوال قرار دادیم و این میکنم جوهر قضیه است و در تو سوالتون فکر کنم این خیلی مهمه، این بخش رابطه نابرابری که وجود داره.
دقیقاً. میدونین یه چیزی که هست، بعضی اوقات وقتی این بحث میشه در رابطه با بالاخره اخباری میاد که یه کشیشی یا یه ملایی به بچه‌ای تجاوز کرده یا اذیتش کرده، آزارش داده، خیلی اوقات صحبت بس بر سر اون فرد برمیگرده، ولی واقعیتش اینه که خیلی سیستماتیک تره از این قضیه. یعنی مسئله فردی نیست و خیلی اوقات فردی میشه به خاطر اینکه میخوان توجه رو از روی مذهب و دستگاه مذهبی بردارن. و میدونین توی ارتش هم خیلی اوقات مثلا اینو میشنوین که میگن که خب یه سری سرباز بودن آدم کشتن. اصلا خود ارتش کارش کشتن و شکنجه مردمه و مذهب هم به نظرم این نوع نقش بازی میکنه، یعنی بر سرکوب مردم. میدونین اینکه بعد مردم، کودکان باید تسلیم بشن به کسایی که نماینده خدا روی زمین و به همین دلیل به نظرم این خیلی به عنوان یه سیستم میشه دید که واقعا اجتناب ناپذیر میکنه اذیت آزار کودکان
و شکل نهایی این قضیه اذیت آزار جنسی کودکان. یعنی شما این مثلا خیلی مهمه توی اون کلیپی رو که نشون دادین صحبت بر سر اینه که کودک آزاری و آزار متفاوت وجود داره ولی شکل جنسیش هم کاملا وجود داره. با نظر گرفتنی که مذهب همیشه نسبت به روابط جنسی دید کاملا غیر انسانی داره، شما تو این چارچوبی رو که دستبسته کودکانو در واقع در اختیار این نیروی غیر قابل کنترل و وحشی قرار میدی، شما ضرب کنیم اون قضیه دیدگاه و نگاه مذهبی رو به روابط جنسی و این کاملا مشخصه. یعنی در پاسخی که به سوال شما میشه داد اینه که حتما اینطوریه.
و چیزی که به خصوص مثلا به شرایطی که مثل ایران یا عربستان سعودی اینو نگاه کنیم که 1000 برابر بدتره. چون مثلا توی اروپا یه اسکاندال بوده، کلیسا، تجاوزاتی که شده به کودکان و اینکه هیچ تحقیقاتی نشده، هیچکی زندانی نشده و غیره. ولی تو خود یه جامعه مثل ایران خب دولتش که اسلامیه میبینیم که این کودک آزاری قانونیه. ازدواج کودکان یه مثال خوبیه و همین که بالاخره یه نوع کودک آزاری و تجاوز جنسی به کودک ولی قانونیه، کاملا قانونیه.
همون جایی که همون نقشی که مذهب داره اینجا شروع کردن در واقع توی کل جامعه اون روابط رو برقرار کردن و دولت همون نقش رو داره بازی کنه. یعنی دولت هم جدا از نقش دولت ماورای مردم قرار داره، به عنوان نماینده خدا این وارد رو روان میکنه و این همون نقش رو داره بازی کنه.
بریم الان مسابقه خیلی جالبی که با کاکس یه خورده اخیراً چند روز پیش انجام دادیم و با هم گوش بدیم. به نظر نکات خیلی جالبی اینجا مطرح میکنه، هم در رابطه با تاثیرات نه فقط روحی روانی بلکه فیزیکی روی کودکانی که اینطوری اذیت و آزار میشن و در ضمن انواع مقاومتایی که شده و میتونه بشه. با ما باشید. Hello, Kaaks. Thank you for joining our program.
My pleasure, absolute pleasure.
I wanted to ask you about some really important work that you're doing with Survivors Voice Europe. What exactly are you doing? What's the purpose of the organisation?
Well, it's sort of changed a little bit. It's evolved. We are an organisation, international organisation, that we're all survivors of Catholic clergy abuse. So everybody in our organisation is a survivor of Catholic clergy. When we first started Survivors Voice, I think it was mainly just a connection with other people because there wasn't a voice really. But since then, it's evolved into all sorts of other things. We've been involved with quite a lot of campaigns. We were at the UN last year for the Committee of the Rights of the Child to give evidence against the Vatican. We gave 6 hours each of evidence against them, and actually it resulted in that amazing sort of victory, really, against the Holy See. We then went off to the UN in January to do another piece of evidence for the Committee Against Torture, because by the definition of torture, according to the Human Rights Association of the UN, childhood abuse is torture. And so we were instrumental in that. But I suppose in essence, our voice really is about empowering each other. because there's a whole cottage industry started up around clergy abuse survivors. Suddenly when there's a tragedy, there is somebody there with a magic bullet to make people better, usually looking for government funding or something like that. And we, as a group, and actually we're only a small group, but we're like-minded, the group that run it anyway, we're not fundraisers, we don't raise money. I don't want to be paid for compassion to other survivors. We'll sell things if we've got something that people want anyway. So it's changed dramatically, but our core belief about staying connected has been really prevalent all the way through. You know, when I first went to Rome, I flew over the Alps, and as I looked down, through the mountains, I saw these little villages, and I just wondered if they knew that each other existed, and I supposed that years ago they didn't know. And so consequently they grew up almost like there was a wolf attacking each village, and they didn't know that this was happening to any of them, and they didn't even know if there was anybody there that had actually killed the wolf. And it started me thinking about how isolated all people who have been abused, and I talk about Catholic clergy abuse, but since I came out, as it were, publicly with my particular story, I have met you, I've met people here today, I've met people from Uganda, from Zambia, from Somalia. At the moment I've got two people staying with me from Nepal. All of them oppressed people who've been abused by some tyrant or another, and I've learned actually that the tyrants may look differently, but what they do is almost identical. It's subjugation of people, especially women.
Well, I mean, I think that the most wonderful thing about the work you do is that it's so tragic when you hear about child abuse, because children are the most vulnerable really in any society, and when it's done by someone who is in a position that's supposed to be protecting you, obviously we know that's not the case. And I, in that sense, how do you find the courage to do something like that, or the strength to do something like that, to stand up to it?
Well, it's easy because all my grown-up years, مريم, I felt like an alien. I really did. I didn't belong in the church. I didn't belong out of it. I didn't belong in my family. I didn't belong out of it. I was isolated because of my secrets, because I felt dirty, ashamed, guilty. I was embarrassed, especially with other women, because women, little girls are supposed to be sugar and spice and all things nice, and I was considered myself dirty and unworthy. I'd been raped, I'd been abused, I was sacrificial, and so I was completely isolated. So for many years I went down the path of alcoholism, I was a drug addict, I had an eating disorder, I self-harmed, I was a mess. And it wasn't really until I found Other Aliens that I actually came to realise that we're all part of the world, and that was the turning point. Now, not all survivors are the victims, survivors, whatever people's words are, not all of them we relate to. It's a bit like being on the Titanic, many people were on it, but there were saints and sinners, there were people who survived, there were people who didn't survive. They all had a different reason for being there, and we don't relate to everybody. But I think because of that isolation, if you find a group of people, even if it's only 2 or 3, that are like-minded and are strong and don't want to be victims anymore, then it's so precious and it's so powerful. And it felt like it was the first time I belonged in the human race. The first time that I believed I was a human being was when I stood in front of those 20,000 people at the Pope protest and saw all of those faces, all of those warm faces supporting us from an atheist, humanist, secularist perspective. It was the first time ever I felt like a part of the human race, and I was 65, so it was a long time to feel as if I didn't belong. So in answer to your question, how do I do it, it's so important now to make up for that lost time, to kind of connect with other causes, which I think is very important to us, because I think when you have a particular cause, there's a tendency to be isolated and blinkered and only think about your own particular issue. But I think if you are able to open your heart up, you see that the people that have done the perpetrating may look different, but the pain is the same, the connection is the same, the heart connection is the same, and that has been revolutionary. And it's hard some people, I mean church people, when they interview me always say, can you forgive? And I always think, what a stupid bloody word that is. Why would you ask me that? It's a church word. But I think you do get to accept, and it's no point going through all of that if you can't transform it into something valuable for others. So these days, you know, we don't go back to Rome to protest. We've turned our back on Rome because they're narcissists, and once you accept that you are dealing with a narcissist, you don't try and cure them. You turn your back on them and you get on with the business of helping each other, empowering each other and making people strong and getting them back to where their potential should have been, really.
I mean, is the church ever going to be held to account for what it's done and how it's, brushed all of this under the carpet?
Probably not. I think they consider themselves to be beyond. And really, if you look at their kind of ethos, they don't believe. Their belief is that they're not here as philanthropic people. They don't consider themselves necessarily to be here for pastoral care for human beings. What they see themselves here is the way showing people how they can get rewards in the next life. So it's a very clever subjugation of people. So whenever they feel like that, what happens to us as individuals is almost inconsequential. So no, I don't think they'll ever change. What I think will change is that decent, like-minded people, or people who are thinking it through and are able to listen to the facts, will make them less powerful. You don't feed a narcissist by fighting them. You turn away from them, they get weaker. So I hope that they'll weaken.
What exactly, if you don't mind me asking, happened to you? What was your experience?
Well, I was raped by a priest, and I was abused when I was 10 by this priest until I was 13, when I was raped in my home, in my bedroom, and my mother caught him and did nothing about it. So age 13, I was an absolute mess. But my issues really have always been, or my belief is, that you can't look at childhood sexual abuse without looking at the environment in which it occurs. And I think it's the Catholic environment that breeds and incubates. It puts priests on a pedestal. They're told that they've got sacred hands. They can't do any menial work because they've got sacred hands. They've been blessed. They are told at age 14 or whatever age they go into the seminary that they're special. They've been chosen by God. They're more important than the rest of the congregation, and that they will be deified. So it's bred a sort of an environment which almost makes it inevitable. So, I think that is the worst part of this indoctrination of children at an early age, sort of driven by fear, by exclusion. As you know, more than anybody, a child, or we fear exclusion more than anything. And as human beings, we're part of we are a social species. We need our packs, we need our teams, our village, our tribes. And if you're excluded from a pack or a tribe or a village, you are like a wildebeest. You're there to be picked off. So I think the worst part of abuse for me has always been the alienation. What has been brilliant is finding other aliens to
I have a question about Iran now, because a lot of child abuse cases are coming to light.
Yes.
And you have people in the government saying that it's a two-way street, that some of the girls wanted this sort of abuse. And I know sometimes you do hear these sorts of things, even here outside of a place like the Islamic regime of Iran. What's your response to that? What would you tell those people?
Rape is rape, and those girls deserve justice. It is a crime against them. They're not valued. They need to be educated to know their value, to know how precious they are. Every one of us is an individual, precious part of the universe, and they deserve justice. There's no justification for rape. Children, if they display, like I've recently had learned of a case of a young girl. She was 11, and one of the things that the priest had said was that she was sexually predatory. She is 11, and if she displayed sexual behaviour, it's probably because she's been abused in her childhood, and she simply is actually manifesting that damage. So if I see that kind of hypervigilance or overtly sexual behaviour, it's usually because that child has been traumatised by sexual abuse. There is never an excuse for abusing a child. A child is a child.
I mean, the thing is, in a place like Iran, there's very little recognition of it and very little support. would you tell people, what should people do when they come across a child who's been abused, especially if they have no mechanisms to get government help, because the government's part of the whole abuse? What sort of, practical suggestions? I mean, you've said some of it on what made you feel better through it.
But I do think the biggest thing is if somebody comes across a child is to tell that child that it was not their fault, that they were not guilty, that they were the victims of this, because the most common experience of most abused people is that they feel responsible and guilty. So the first thing is to instill upon them that it's never, ever, ever is their fault. It is always the fault of the perpetrator. And I despair of that sort of country where these girls are so isolated. But I would honestly say that in my experience, connecting with other people with similar experiences is so empowering. And it is a drastic situation, but great big movements have been started by very small people, one girl saying to another girl, look what happened to me, and then holding each other and actually empowering each other to get well. And my research at the moment and the way that I teach at the moment is about brain damage. The brain damage which is caused by childhood abuse. It causes permanent brain damage. It causes damage to the immune system. It causes damage to the metabolic system. And that doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter whether you're in Iran or whether you're in Ireland. If you are abused when your body is still developing and your brain is still developing, there is going to be damage, and that will sustain. So there is evidence, real academic research to suggest that children who are abused in childhood have a shortened lifespan. They are more susceptible to life-threatening and I have 9 life-threatening diseases. But then I'm old, but I've had them a long time. And, nobody can prove that. But I know that my illnesses, my physical damage started when I was 10 or probably younger. So really, I think it's whatever we can do to reach out to them as well. I think if we can, I think what you're doing with this is absolutely wonderful. I Skype with survivors all over the world. I Skype with them from Hawaii, from Australia, from Poland, from Russia, wherever technology can be used, then we can reach people. In the past, they didn't even know we were here. I've come across a lady who lives in Tasmania, who is nearly my age, so she's nearly 70, and she didn't know there was anybody else in the world that has suffered, and I felt like that. And she's absolutely over the moon because she's absolutely at the age of 70 has realised that she was never alone, that there were other girls, other boys as well, suffering in the same way. So we do have to reach out to people, and when we get hold of them, we've got to hold them and show them how precious they are, wherever they come from.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
امیدوارم از مصاحبه‌ای که شنیدین خوشتون اومده باشه. یعنی یه چیزی که کاکس میگه اینه که اولا باید قدرت رو از دستگاه مذهبی گرفت اگر میخوایم جلوی اینو کودک آزاری رو بگیریم، که این خیلی مشخصه، و در ضمن باید بشه روش صحبت کرد. اینم مهمه، باید مطرح بشه تو جامعه. توی خود اروپا این یه راهی بوده که تونسته کلیسا رو عقب برونه و از حق کودک دفاع کنه. برای مثال تو ایران ما شنیدیم بعد از یه سری تجاوزات علیه کودکان که واقعا فجیع و فاجعه است، میبینیم که معاون وزیر آموزش و پرورش حمیدرضا کفاش گفته که نباید روی این چیزا صحبت کرد، به خاطر اینکه ما یه کشور اسلامی هستیم. یعنی چه؟ معلومه باید صحبت کرد.
مثل آقای احمدی نژاد میگفت که توی ایران آدمای گی و هموسکسوال وجود ندارن، توی رفته تو نیویورک حرف میزنن، حرف بیخود میزنن. این آقا هم حرف بیخود میزنه. اینو در ادامه یه صحبت اتفاقی بود که افتاده بود که یک معلم مذهبی به کودک، به یک بچه مدرسه و کودک توی مدرسه تجاوز جنسی کرده. وقتی صدا سرش در آمد، همین آقایون اومدن مطرح کردن، گفتن خب گرایش جنسی بین دو نفر بوده، بین اون آدم بزرگ و کودک. نشون میده چقدر از لحاظ فکری و اجتماعی این جریان فاسده، کسایی که در حکومت جمهوری اسلامی هستن و در واقع همون افکار فاسد مذهبی رو که مذهب اسلام مثل تمام مذاهب دیگه در درون خودش داره، این بار شروع کردن به تمام جامعه گسترش بدن.
ولی به قول کاکس تجاوز تموم شده رفت و اینا باید به عنوان تجاوز دیده بشه و از کودکانی که اینطوری اذیت میشن محافظت بشه و ازشون دفاع بشه. اما بریم به یک بخش جدید برنامه ما که اخبار شوکه آور هفته است. اخبار زیادی هست که شوکه آوره، ولی ما دوست داریم تو این برنامه در رابطه با 2 موضوع مهم صحبت کنیم که اهمیت داره. یکیش در رابطه با غنچه قوامی، یک زن 25 ساله که الان 3 ماه در زندان اوین به سر برده، 6 ماهش در سلول انفرادی بوده و فقط به خاطر اینکه میگفت باید زنها بتونن برن توی استادیوم آزادی و بتونن والیبال رو ببینن و مثل هر کس دیگه تو هر کجای دنیا. و اخبار شوکه‌آور دوم روی مسئله همین 6 نفر، 3 زن و 3 مرد که به خاطر رقصیدن و خوشحالی نشون دادن به آهنگ هپی فرل الان به 6 ماه تا 1 سال محکوم به زندان شدن و در ضمن 91 ضربه شلاق که الان به تعویق افتاده ولی امکانش هست که اجرا بشه. واقعا فجیحه این نوع رفتار علیه کسایی که فقط میخوان خوشحالی کنن و زندگی کنن.
ظاهرا اینا میخوان جلوی مردم رو با این تنبیه ها بگیرن ولی نمیتونن. همونطوری که وقتی این گروه هپی تو ایران ویدیوشون در واقع مورد استقبال عمومی تو مردم دنیا قرار گرفت، جمهوری اسلامی تلاش کرد که اینا رو دستگیر بکنه ولی سریع عقب نشینی کرد در برابر افکار عمومی جهان و لازمه که از خانم غنچه و این گروه هپی کاملا پشتیبان بشه و آبروی جمهوری اسلامی در این مورد برده شه.
دقیقاً باید 100% پشتیبانی کنیم از این افراد که و خواهان این باشیم که این احکام ضد بشری اجرا نشن. اما بریم به بخش آخر برنامه‌مون که فتوای احمقانه هفته است. و فتوای احمقانه این هفته خیلی جالبه چون این از سوی یه سری اسلامیون انگلیسه که فتوا دادن علیه کسایی که از انگلیس رفتن و به داعش پیوستن و گفتن کسایی که میپیوندن به داعش مرتدن. به نظر من خود اینم احمقانه است، به خاطر اینکه مذهب نباید چنین نقشی بازی کنه. فتوا نخواستیم، خیلی ممنون، قرن 21 داریم زندگی میکنیم.
به علاوه اینکه این فتواها از جناح‌های مختلف مرتجعین دنیا، هواداران داعش فتوا میدن برین، مخالفینش میگن فتوا بدن نرین. این فتوا پشت فتواهای مخالف هم. بهتر مردم به حد فتوای احمقانه آخوند دستگاه مذهبی در واقع گوش نکنن و بتونن به شکل واقعی از وحشیگری داعش رو محکوم بکنن و در دفاع از انسانیت بکنن. فتوا به درد کسی نمیخوره.
به خصوص داعش، برخورد با داعش برخورد سیاسی میخواد، نه برخورد فتوا و مذهبی. خود اون بخشی از مشکلاته. امیدوارم از برنامه این هفته خوشتون اومده باشه. حتما نظراتتون رو برامون بفرستین. برنامه ما رو تبلیغ کنین، به دوستاتون، به آشنایتون بگین که پای برنامه‌مون بشینن. واقعا دوست داریم براتون برنامه درست کنیم و امیدواریم که شما برنامه ما رو دوست داشته باشین. به هر حال تا هفته آینده امیدوارم واقعا هفته خیلی خوبی داشته باشین. تا هفته بعد، بای.